welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. Chapter 15. Undiplomatic Relations. Mr. Kiku returned to his office with his stomach jumping, but he did not stop to cater to it. Instead, he leaned across his desk and said, "Sergey, come in now." Greenberg entered and laid down 2 spools of sound tape. "I'm glad to get rid of these. Whew! Wipe them, please, and then forget you ever heard them." "Delighted." Greenberg dipped them into a cavity. "Cripes, boss, couldn't you have given him an anesthetic?" "Unfortunately, no." "Wes Robbins was pretty rough on him. I felt like a window peeper. Why did you want me to hear them? I don't have to deal with the mess, or do I?" "No, but someday you will need to know how it is done." "Boss, did you have any intention of letting it stick when he fired you?" "Don't ask silly questions." "Sorry. How did you make out with a hard case?" "She won't let him go." "So?" "So he's going." "She'll scream her head off in the papers." "So she will." Mr. Kiku leaned toward his desk. "Wes?" "Mr. Robbins is at the funeral of the Venerian foreign minister," a female voice answered, "with the secretary." "Oh, yes. Ask him to see me when he returns, please." "Yes, Mr. Kiku." "Thank you, Shizuko." The undersecretary turned to Greenberg. "Sergey, your acting appointment as diplomatic officer first class was made permanent when you were assigned to this affair." "Was it?" "Yes. The papers will no doubt reach you. You are now being promoted to chief diplomatic officer, acting. I will hold up the permanent appointment for 90 days to let some noses get back into joint." Greenberg's face showed no expression. "Nice," he said, "but why? Because I brush my teeth regularly, or the way I keep my briefcase polished?" "You are going to Hiroshijud as deputy and chief of mission. Mr. McClure will be ambassador, but I doubt that he will learn the tongue, which will of course place the burden of dealing with them on you. So you must acquire a working knowledge of their language at once. Follow me?" Greenberg translated this to read, "McClure will have to talk to them through you, which keeps him in line." "Yes," he answered thoughtfully, "but how about Dr. Ftamel? The ambassador will probably use him as interpreter rather than myself." To himself he added, "Boss, you can't do this to me. McClure can short me out through Ftamel, and there I am, 900 light years from help." "Sorry," Kiku answered, "but I can't spare Ftamel. I shall retain him to interpret the Hiroshige mission they will leave behind." He accepted the job. Greenberg frowned. "I'll start picking his brains in earnest then. I've soaked up some Hirogia already. Makes your throat raw. But when did they agree to all this? Have I slept through something while I was in Westville?" "They haven't agreed. They will." "I admire your confidence, boss. They strike me as being as stubborn as Mrs. Stewart. Speaking of such, Ftamel spoke to me while you were bickering with her. He says they're getting insistent about the Stewart kid. Now that you know he's going, shouldn't we quiet them down? Ftamel is jittery. He says the only thing that restrains them from giving us the works is that it would displease our old pal Lummox." "No," answered Kiku. "We do not tell them, nor do we tell Ftamel. I want him to remain apprehensive." Greenberg chewed a knuckle. "Boss," he said slowly, "isn't that asking for trouble? Or do you have a hunch that they aren't the heavyweights they claim to be? If it comes to a slugging match, can we outslug them?" "I doubt it extremely, but the Stewart boy is my hole card." "I suppose so. Far be it from me to quote you-know-who, but if the risk is that great, aren't the people entitled to know?" "Yes, but we can't tell them." "How's that again?" Mr. Kiku frowned. "Sergey," he said slowly, "this society has been in crisis ever since the first rocket reached the moon. For 3 centuries, scientists and engineers and explorers have repeatedly broken through to new areas, new dangers, new situations. Each time the political managers have had to scramble to hold things together like a juggler with too much in the air. It's unavoidable. But we have managed to keep a jury-rigged Republican form of government and to maintain democratic customs. We can be proud of that. But it is not now a real democracy, and it can't be. I conceive it to be our duty to hold the society together while it adjusts to a strange and terrifying world. It would be pleasant to discuss each problem, take a vote, then repeal it later if the collective judgment proved faulty, but it's rarely that easy. We find ourselves oftener like pilots of a ship in a life-and-death emergency. Is it the pilot's duty to hold powwows with passengers, or is it his job to use his skill and experience to try to bring them home safely? You make it sound convincing, boss. I wonder if you're right. I wonder also, Mr. Kiku went on. I intend to hold the conference with the Rogii tomorrow morning. Okay, I'll tell Fdamel they ought to stay quiet overnight. Well, that is what I intended, but since they are anxious, we will postpone until the following day and let them grow still more anxious. Kiku thought. Have Fdamel tell them this. Our customs require that a party wishing to negotiate send presents ahead. Therefore, they must send us presents. Tell them that the lavishness of the gifts gauge the seriousness of the matter to be discussed. Too poor a gift will prejudice their petition. Greenberg frowned. You have some swindle in mind, but I miss the point. Fdamel knows that our customs don't call for it. Can you convince him that this is a custom which he has not encountered? Or can you take him into your confidence? I see conflict in him. His loyalty is to his clients, but his sympathies appear to be with us. I'd better not try to kid him, but getting a Rargelian to lie when he is interpreting professionally, I doubt if he can. Then phrase it so that it is not a lie. Tell him that it is a very old custom, which is true, and that we resort to it only on sufficiently important occasions, which this is. Give him an out, let him see your purpose, gain a sympathetic translation. Can do. But why, boss? Just for bulge? Precisely. We are negotiating from weakness. It is imperative that we start with the upper hand. I have hopes that the symbolism of the petitioner bearing presents is as universal as we have found it to be up to now. Suppose they won't kick through with the loot. Then we sit tight until they change their minds, Kiku added. Start selecting your team. Let me see a list tomorrow. Greenberg groaned. I was going to turn in early. Never count on it in this business. Oh, yes. As soon as the conference is over, send a good man, Peters perhaps, up to their ship to see what changes are needed for human passengers. Then we'll tell the Roshii what we require. Wait a minute, boss. I prefer one of our own ships. How do you know they've got room for us? Our ships will follow. But the Roshia Lummox goes with them, and young Stewart goes with Lummox. Therefore, our mission goes in their ship in order that the boy will be accompanied by humans. I see. Sorry. There will be room. They will leave their own mission behind at this same time, or no one will go. 100 Roshii, to pluck a figure, will certainly vacate living space for 100 of our sort. In other words, boss, Greenberg said softly, you are insisting on hostages. Hostages, Mr. Kiku said primly, is a word that no diplomat should ever use. He turned back to his desk. The ground floor auditorium of the Spatial Affairs Building was selected for the conference because its doors were large enough and its floors strong enough. It might have been safer to hold it at the spaceport, as Dr. Fdamel urged, but Mr. Kiku insisted on the Hiroshii coming to him for reasons of protocol. Their presence preceded them. The gifts were stacked on both sides of the great hall and were lavish in quantity. Their values and qualities were still unknown. The departmental xenologists were as eager as a child faced with birthday presents, but Mr. Kiku had ordered them to hold off until the conference was over. Sergei Greenberg joined Mr. Kiku in the retiring room behind the rostrum as the Roshii delegation entered the hall. He looked wearied. I don't like this, boss. Kiku looked up. Why not? Greenberg glanced at the others present, Mr. McClure and a double for the Secretary General. The double, a skilled actor, nodded and went back to studying the speech he was about to deliver. But McClure said sharply, What's the trouble, Greenberg? Those devils up to something? I hope not, Greenberg addressed Kiku. I checked arrangements from the air, and they look good. We've got the Boulevard of Suns barricaded from here to the port, and enough reserves on each side for a small war. Then I picked up the head of their column as it left the port and flew above it. They dropped off reserves of their own about every quarter of a mile and set up gear of some sort at each strong point. It might just be communication links back to their ship, but I doubt it. I think it must be weapons. So do I, agreed Kiku. The secretary said worriedly, Now look here, Mr. Kiku, if you please, Mr. McClure. Sergey, the Chief of Staff reported this earlier. I advised the Secretary General that we should make no move unless they try to pass our barricades. We could lose a lot of men. So we could. But what will you do, Sergey, when you are required to enter a stranger's camp to palaver? Trust him completely, or try to cover your retreat? Yes. I consider this the most hopeful sign we have had yet. If those are weapons, as I hope they are, it means they do not regard us as negligible opponents. One does not set up artillery against mice. He looked around. Shall we go? I think we have let them stew long enough. Ready, Arthur? Sure. The Secretary General's double chucked his script aside. That boy Robbins knows how to write a speech. He doesn't load up a sentence with syllabants and make me spray the first 5 rows. Good. They went in, the actor first, then the secretary, then the permanent undersecretary, followed by his assistant. Of the long procession of Frosii that had left the spaceport, only a dozen had entered the auditorium, but even that number made the hall seem filled. Mr. Kiku looked down at them with interest, it being the first time he had laid eyes on a Hiroshiu. It was true, he saw, that these people did not present the gollywog friendliness shown in the pictures of the Hiroshia lummox. These were adults, even though smaller than lummox. The one just in front of the platform and flanked by 2 others was staring back at him. The stare was cold and confident. Mr. Kiku found the creature's gaze made him uneasy. He wanted to shift his eyes. Instead, he stared back and reminded himself that his own hypnotherapist could do it as well or better than the Hiroshiu. Greenberg touched his elbow. They've set up weapons in here, too, he whispered. See that, in the back? Mr. Kiku answered, We are not supposed to know that it is a weapon. Assume that it is apparatus for their own record of the conference. Dr. Ftamel was standing beside the foremost Hiroshiu. The undersecretary said to him, Tell them what our Secretary General is. Describe him as chief of 17 powerful planets. The Rargelian hesitated. What about the president of your council? The Secretary General embodies both of them for this occasion. Very well, my friend. The Rargelian spoke in high-pitched speech that reminded Kiku of puppies whining. The Hiroshiu answered him briefly in the same tongue, and suddenly Mr. Kiku no longer felt dread that had been inspired by the creature's stare. It was not possible to feel awe for a person who sounded like a lonesome puppy. But he reminded himself that deadly orders could be given in any speech. Ftamel was speaking. Here beside me is, he broke into a multiple squeal of the strange tongue, who is commander of the ship and the expedition. No, perhaps he would be better. He is hereditary marshal and... The Rargelian broke off and fretted. You have no equivalent rank. Perhaps I should say mayor of the palace? Greenberg suddenly said, How about boss, Doc? A happy suggestion. Yes, he is the boss. His social position is not highest, but his practical authority is almost without limit. Kiku asked, Is his authority such that he may conduct plenipotentiary bargaining? Ah, yes, certainly. Then we will get on with it. He turned to the actor and nodded. Then he spoke to the desk in front of him, using a hush circuit. Getting all this? A voice answered in his ears alone, Yes, sir, the picture pickup faded once, but it's all right now. Are the Secretary General and the Chief of Staff listening? I believe so, sir. Their offices are monitoring. Very well. Mr. Kiku listened to the Secretary General's speech. It was short, but delivered with great dignity, and the actor paced it so that Ftamel might translate. The Secretary General welcomed the Roshii to Earth, assured them that the peoples of the Federation were happy that the Roshii had at long last found their lost sibling, and added that this happy accident should be the occasion for the Roshii to take their rightful place in the community of civilizations. He sat down and promptly went to sleep for all practical purposes, eyes open and face fixed in kindly dignity. The double could hold this Roman emperor pose for hours without really noticing the review or ceremony or whatever he might be chaperoning. Mr. McClure spoke briefly, seconding the Secretary General and adding that the Federation was now prepared to discuss any matters of business between the Federation and the noble Roshii. Greenberg leaned to Kiku and whispered, "Should we clap, boss? Somebody ought to, and I don't think they know how." "Shut up," Kiku said amiably. "Dr. Ftamel, does the commander have a speech of formality to deliver?" "I think not." Ftamel spoke to the leading Roshiu, then answered, "The reply is a serious comment on the two speeches made, rather than an answer of formality. He states that the Roshii have no need of other lesser breeds, and says we should not get to business without further trivia. If it is true that they have no need for other peoples, please ask him why they have come to us and why they have offered us presents." "But you insisted on it, my friend," Ftamel answered in surprise. "Thank you, Doctor, but I do not want your comment. Require him to answer. Please do not coach him." "I will try." Ftamel exchanged several sentences of the high whining with the Roshij commander, then turned back to Kiku. "Forgive me. He says that he acceded to your childishness as the simplest means of accomplishing his purpose. He wishes to discuss now the surrender of John Thomas Stewart." "Please tell him the matter is not open to discussion. The agenda requires we first settle the question of diplomatic relations." Pardon me, sir. Diplomatic relations is a concept difficult to translate. I have been working on it for days." "Tell him that is what he sees now as an example of diplomatic relations. Free peoples negotiating as equals with peaceful intentions to their mutual benefit." The Rargelian simulated a sigh. "Each of those concepts is almost equally difficult. I will try." Presently he answered, "The hereditary marshal says that if what we are doing constitutes diplomatic relations, you have them now. Where is the Stewart boy?" "Not so fast. The agenda must be taken up point by point. They must accept an embassy and a mixed mission for cultural, scientific, and trade purposes. They must leave with us a similar embassy and mission. Regular travel between our two sovereignties must be planned. Not until these are disposed of can there be any mention of the Stewart boy." "I will try again." Ftamel spoke to the boss Rojiu at length. The reply was short. "He tells me to tell you that all those points are rejected as not worthy of consideration. Where is the Stewart boy?" "In that case," Mr. Kiku answered quietly, "tell them that we do not bargain with barbarians. Tell them to pick up the trash, sure to use a forceful translation, trash, with which they have littered our home, and get quickly back to their ship. They are required to take off at once. They must bundle their precious Roshia aboard by force if need be, if they ever expect to see her again. They will never be allowed to land." Ftamel looked as if he were about to burst into tears, though he was incapable of shedding them. "Please, I beg you not to antagonize them. I tell tales out of school. I go beyond my professional duties, but they could now destroy the city without recourse to their ship." "Deliver the message. The conference is ended." Mr. Kiku stood up, picked up the others with his eyes, and headed for the retiring room. The double went ahead. McClure caught Kiku by the arm and fell into step. "Henry, you're running this, granted, but shouldn't you talk it over? They're savage beasts. It could—" "Mr. McClure," Kiku said softly, "as a distinguished predecessor once said, in dealing with certain types, you must step on their toes until they apologize." He urged the secretary toward the door. "But suppose they don't?" "That is a hazard. Please, let us not argue in their presence." They went into the retiring room, the door closed behind them. Mr. Greenberg turned to Kiku. Nice try, boss, but what do we do now? We wait. Okay, Greenberg went nervously to the wall relay, picked up the scene inside the auditorium. Hiroshi had not left. He could just make out Ftamel surrounded by creatures much larger than the Medusoid. The double said to Kiku, Through with me, sir? Yes, Arthur, good job. Thanks, I've got time to get this makeup off and catch the second game of the doubleheader. Good, perhaps you'd better change your appearance here. Shucks, the photographers know, they play along. He left whistling. McClure sat down, lit a cigar, took a puff, put it down. Henry, you ought to notify the chief of staff. He knows. We wait. They waited. Greenberg said suddenly, Here comes Ftamel. He hurried to the door and let the Rargelian in. Dr. Ftamel seemed very tense. My dear Mr. Kiku, the Hiroshige commander states that they will agree to your strange wishes for the sake of prompt settlement. He insists that you now deliver the Stewart boy. Please tell him that he misunderstands entirely the nature of friendly relations between civilized people. We do not barter the freedom of one of our citizens against their worthless favors, even as they would not barter the freedom of their Hiroshia lummox. Then tell him that I order them to leave at once. Ftamel said earnestly, I reluctantly deliver your message. He came back quickly. They agree to your terms. Good. Come, Sergi. Mr. McClure, there is no need for you to appear unless it suits you. He went out into the hall, followed by Greenberg and Ftamel. The Hiroshige boss, it seemed to Kiku, was more baleful than ever, but the details went promptly forward. An equal number of Hiroshii and of humans to constitute the missions, passage to be provided in the Hiroshige ship, one of the Hiroshii there present to be ambassador to the Federation. Ftamel assured them that the Hiroshiu was of practical rank second only to the expedition commander. And now, said the Hiroshige commander, it is time to turn over to us John Thomas Stewart. Ftamel added anxiously, I trust you have made arrangements, my friend? I dislike the tenor of this. It has been too easy. With a feeling of satisfaction soothing his troubled stomach, Mr. Kiku answered, I see no difficulty. The Stewart boy is willing to go, now that we are assured of civilized relations. Please make sure that they understand that he goes as a free being and not a slave, not a pet. The Hiroshii must guarantee his status and his return passage in one of their own ships whenever he so wishes. Ftamel translated. Presently he answered, All of that is satisfactory, except for something which I will translate as a minor detail. The Stewart boy will be a member of the household of the Hiroshia lummox. Naturally, I translate here most carefully, naturally, the question of the boy returning, if ever, is a personal prerogative of the Hiroshia lummox. Should she grow tired of him and wish to return him, a ship would be made available. No. No what, sir? A simple negative. The subject of the Stewart boy is finished. Ftamel turned back to his clients. They say, he answered presently, that there is no treaty. I know that. Treaties are not signed with... they have a word meaning servant. They have servants of several sorts, some higher, some lower. Use the word for the lowest sort. Tell them that there is no treaty between servants that have no power to treat. Tell them to go and be quick about it. Ftamel looked at Kiku sadly. I admire you, my friend, but I do not envy you. He turned to the expedition commander and whined for several moments. The Hiroshio opened his mouth wide, looked at Kiku, and squealed like a kicked puppy. Ftamel gave a start and moved away. Very bad profanity, untranslatable. The monster continued to make noises. Ftamel tried frantically to translate. Contempt, lower animal, eat you with relish. Follow back your ancestors, eat them as well. Your despicable race must be taught manners. Kidnappers, child stealers. He stopped in great agitation. The Hiroshio lumbered toward the platform, reared up until he was eye to eye with Mr. Kiku. Greenberg slid a hand under his desk and located a control that would throw a tanglefoot field over the lower floor, a permanent installation. The hall had seen other disturbances. But Mr. Kiku sat like stone. They eyed each other, the massive thing from out there and the little elderly human. Nothing moved in the hall. Nothing was said. Then, from the back of the hall broke out a whining, as if a whole basket of puppies had been disturbed at once. The Roshage commander whirled around, making the floor shake, and shrilled to his retainers. He was answered, and he whined back sharp command. All 12 Roshii swarmed out of the door, moving with incredible speed for being so ungainly. Kiku stood up and watched them. Greenberg grabbed his arm. "Boss, the chief of staff is trying to reach you." Kiku shook him off. "Tell him not to be hasty. It is most important that he not be hasty. Is our car waiting?" Well, someone has kicked the anthill full of big, dangerous alien ants. And we will find out who and what comes of that next time.